In an earlier exercise, you saw how to draw shapes using your pencil tool. Well, right next to the pencil tool in the toolbox is your paintbrush tool. Go ahead and select that tool. Now, the paintbrush tool is somewhat similar to the pencil tool in that you can draw lines with it, of course. But the main difference between the two is where the pencil tool draws with a stroke, the paintbrush tool draws with a fill. So again, with the paintbrush tool selected, go ahead and look down here in the bottom of your toolbox. From here you can specify from these pull-down menus a brush size and a brush shape. If you click on the brush size pull-down menu, you'd get what you expect. You can choose different sizes. I'm going to go ahead and choose a medium-sized brush. And from the brush shape pull-down menu, you can choose different brush shapes, everywhere from a circle to a square, rectangles, and lines. And the lines are really great if you want a calligraphic type look where when you're drawing with it, it has a tapered edge. For now, I'm going to leave it set to a circle. Then I'm going to specify what kind of color I want to paint with. And again, keep in mind that the paintbrush paints with a fill, and other tools such as the pen tool, the line tool, and the pencil tool will draw with a stroke. So if I want to modify the color that I'm painting with, I would choose a different fill color. So for my fill color pull-down menu here in my toolbox, I'm going to choose a blue-green color. And then I can just click and drag around the stage to draw with my paintbrush tool. Now, one option that I have in my Properties panel is a smoothing option. If I click and drag on that pull-down menu, I can select different smoothings. I'm going to go ahead and drag it all the way up to 100. The default setting, by the way, is 50. And then, going back onto my stage, I'm going to click and drag to create another line. And you can see the difference between the two. This is smoothing set to the default of 50, and this is smoothing set to the new option that we just set of 100. What's actually happening is as you draw your fill, as you draw your shape, this smoothing option is going to affect how the edges of your shape will be smoothed by Flash after you let go of the mouse button. So as you're drawing, you're seeing your shape exactly as you draw it, but as soon as you let go, Flash is going to apply a smoothing of 100 to the edges of your shape. And you can see this kind of has a nice stylistic look that it applies to it. Conversely, if I drag the smoothing slider all the way down to the lowest it can go, which is in this case 0, and hit enter or return on my keyboard, as I draw my shape with the paintbrush tool and let go, Flash is not going to smooth it at all. It's going to keep it exactly the way I painted it. So I can change the smoothing from 0 all the way up to 100 to actually smooth or not the edges of my shape. Also, over here in my toolbox, in the options section for my paintbrush, there's this little icon. If you click on that, you have different painting modes. By default, the one that's selected is Paint Normal, which means that when I paint with my paintbrush, it paints just like you normally would. It paints on top of whatever I'm painting on my stage. But I can also choose Paint Fills, Paint Behind, Paint Selection, or Paint Inside. Let me show you what those are here really quickly. Before I do that, though, I'm going to select my selection tool, choose Control-A to select everything that's on the stage, and then press the backspace or delete key on my keyboard to get rid of all that. Then I'm going to select my oval tool, and I'm going to draw an oval on my stage by holding down the Shift key and clicking and dragging to create a circle. Then I'm going to go back and select my paintbrush tool again, and let's take a look at what the default paint mode of normal is. As I draw, it's just going to paint like it normally would. It paints on top of fills, it paints on top of strokes. It doesn't really care. It paints like you normally would think paint would work on top of paper. I'm going to undo those changes that I just made by pressing Control-Z on Windows or Command-Z on Macintosh until I'm back to my default circle again. Then from the Paint Mode pull-down menu over here in the Options section of my toolbox, I'm going to choose Paint Fills. And so we can clearly see this, I'm going to change my fill color that I'm painting with to something more garish, like red. And then I'm just going to click and drag starting outside of my shape here, and I'm going to paint over my shape like that. When I let go, you can see that it's only painted on top of the fills. It's left the stroke alone. So unlike Paint Normal, where it painted on top of the stroke and the fill, it didn't care. When I select Paint Fills from my Paint Mode pull-down menu, it's going to paint only on the fills and leave the stroke alone. I'm going to undo again, so I'm back to my default shape. And then from the Paint Mode pull-down menu, I'm going to choose Paint Behind. Now you can kind of guess what's going to happen just by their names. Once I choose Paint Behind, and I start by clicking and dragging outside of my shape, and I paint over my shape like so, when I let go, it takes that paint that I just painted and it puts it behind my shape. Paint Behind. So if I want to paint behind any shape I have, I can just choose the Paint Behind Paint Mode, and it's going to paint behind all my shapes. It's going to leave all my shapes intact. I'm going to undo one more time, and then from my Paint Mode pull-down menu, I'm going to choose Paint Selection. Now again, as this name implies, it's only going to paint my selections. So first I need to select something. With my Selection tool, my arrow tool, I'm going to select just the fill of my shape by clicking on it once. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to select my Brush tool, and I'm just going to start painting over my shape. As you would expect, it's only painted on the content that I had selected. This can be very useful if you have multiple shapes inside your project and you only want to paint on specific portions of those shapes. You can select those using your Selection tool, or as you'll see later with the Lasso tool, and then when you paint with your paintbrush, it's only going to paint on the areas that you have selected. Again, that's something that can be very useful depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. I'm going to Command Z or Control Z again to undo those changes. And the last paint option that you can specify is Paint Inside. I'm going to select that option, and then I'm going to deselect my shape by selecting my Selection tool. Try saying that fast 10 times. And I'm going to click on my stage someplace else to deselect that. Then I'm going to go back and select my Paintbrush tool, and then this time I'm going to click and drag to paint on my circle, but I'm going to click and drag starting on the fill. So I'm going to click and paint starting on the fill and just painting over the shape. As you can see, it's limited what I'm painting on to where I started clicking and dragging. So because I started clicking and painting on the fill, it's limited that painting to only affect the fill and not the stroke. On the other hand, instead of starting my painting on the fill, if I start painting outside of the shape and clicking and dragging around while I paint, you can see when I let go of my mouse button that it's limited my painting effect to not affect the shape, but only where I started painting outside of the shape. So this painting mode option, Paint Inside, really is contextually sensitive based on wherever I first start my painting. If I start painting just on the fill, my painting will only affect the fill. And if I start my painting outside of my shape, my painting will only affect the stuff that's outside of my shape, not the actual shape itself. So Paint Inside affects basically where I start my painting at. So those are different painting modes. I can choose everything from Paint Normal to only have my painting affect fills or selections or even behind my shapes. Again, Paint Normal is the default option. There you have your paintbrush and all the options that you can specify while you're painting with your paintbrush. The important thing to keep in mind is how the paintbrush differs from the other drawing tools, such as the pencil tool, the pen tool, and the line tool, is with the paintbrush tool, you're painting with the actual fill. So you need to make sure that when you want to modify the color that you're painting with, that you change the fill color and not the stroke color.